Nope, Chief Toom just here to talk about a couple issues today. We had some inquiries from the press and from other people within the community. It's always a hot topic of conversation when we talk about overdoses and drug overdoses. And we just felt we had kind of talked, it's been a while since we've kind of given some numbers or talked about it. And it's kind of one of those things that we just collectively say that we can't talk about enough anyway. But again, working through, just to provide some context, we have 7 overdose deaths this year so far. We have one that's awaiting toxicology. That puts us on pace below where we were at last year. Last year at this point we were at 10. And it's something that we're always looking at in trends and numbers, but anytime you see some reports or some stuff filtering through the community, and I know some of the stuff that's happened at the prison has even garnered further attention, there's just a couple things to point out. That within law enforcement, we have to look at the toxicology in many of these cases to see what the definitive cause is. And we'll look at ours from the last year. Of the 7 that we've had, again, the 8th is awaiting toxicology. 6 are fentanyl, and 1 is a combined toxicity with meth, fentanyl, hydrocodone, a variety of drugs. But when we look at these drug cases, I think sometimes we hear terminology like, hey, it's a bad batch, or it's a hot batch. The reality is that with the drugs that we're dealing with in this day and age, there's no such thing. They're all bad batches. Like they're all bad drugs. We're talking about fentanyl in particular and methamphetamine. As we kind of covered last year, there was more methamphetamine deaths than there were fentanyl deaths. These are potent drugs all the time. There's no safe way that they can be used. And that's where, again, we just felt like talking about it today because we knew it was kind of being discussed in a variety of ways because it keeps entering the news cycle, especially with recent events. And want to just highlight that just kind of concept too, that there is no safe way to do drugs. Now, we say this, but we also talk about the resources that are here within the community, whether that's the Avera Addiction Center, whether that's the Link, other resources, Emily's Hope, which we've talked about as far as supporting families and people recovering from overdoses. That's where we have a lot of ground to gain, is by partnering with the nonprofits, partnering with the people who are out there to work on some of these root causes with addiction and to catch people when they kind of come through. And so, again, knew it was out in the news, and we knew there was some discussion, again, especially with some of the stuff that occurred at the penitentiary recently with the discussion of drugs. It's a good time for us to highlight, again, just the overall discussion of drugs and just work through some of those issues as a community, continue to preach the same message that we preached. Make sure your friends, families, and loved ones have the support they need, push them towards resources, which puts them on the road to recover from addiction. And again, we will continue to keep you informed. But again, I can tell you that we're behind with our deaths from last year. That's still 8 people, right? We're not celebrating the fact that it's a little less than last year, but we are looking at the trend and realizing that 8 people have died this year from overdoses, and there's still plenty of work to do and plenty of community action that can come along with it. Any questions on this?
Is meth still ahead of fentanyl?
So this year, fentanyl, we've seen more fentanyl deaths than methamphetamine deaths. But we look at year by year, and that kind of depends on some of the different. But last year, again, we had more meth deaths than fentanyl deaths. But there's a few combined with meth and fentanyl as well. Going back to 2023, we had more fentanyl than meth. 2022, more meth than fentanyl. So it continues to roll. We talk about a variety of drugs, even the changing within meth and fentanyl. The meth that we're seeing is highly potent. Fentanyl, we're now seeing more powder than pill. We're seeing how it's delivered change. We're seeing people who really struggle with addiction, building tolerances, needing more of that. And that, of course, produces more dangerous effects too, as we kind of look at this cycle of addiction that's there. And so, again, we keep pretty good stats in this from year-to-year basis. And I think another thing too we can look at, there are overdoses that we don't know about, right? And these are the ones that are reported to us. We talk about the importance of Narcan as far as giving people a second chance, but that also means that there may be things that we're not aware of or learning about because of Narcan's being used, and for whatever reason that doesn't get reported to law enforcement. And again, we want to just look at the whole system as a whole and say, again, how are we supporting people? How can we get them to the resources or services that they need, whether it's meth or fentanyl, or as I've said time and time again, alcohol continues to be a huge issue when we talk about addiction within our community.
Is there anything that indicates this year's 8 are
No. So yeah, again, we would look at that pretty closely and say, what's the web? What's the thing? When we build cases, we're looking at all these facts too. And there's nothing, I mean, we look at certain pockets here and there. Our detectives do a good job of making links or correlation, but in a city right now of 220,000 people and a county that expands into even further, there's obviously a lot of different factors, but a lot of people who are struggling with addiction and using drugs. So.
Can you talk about where you're seeing the drugs come in from?
Yep, we've seen a shift again too, and since the sheriff's not here today, I'll be happy to talk about a lot of the drugs coming over the southern border. He's been consistent with that message, and we see it. We know that from a meth lab standpoint, early in my career, we saw meth labs within our community. We don't see meth labs anymore. In fact, I think the last one we had was within maybe 1 to 5 years ago. It was more of a cleanup. That meth is produced overseas or across the border and shipped into our country. Fentanyl, same thing. It's been covered pretty well with the precursors from China, put together in different labs, moved into our country. And that's where our partnership, especially Sioux Falls Drug Area Task Force, does an outstanding job, but not only here, but we partner with the DEA from a federal level too and work on cases to find the ways we can impact within our community. And so that will continue to be an issue. But coming back to what we've known for decades now when it comes to drugs, when the demand is there, the supply that will be there. It will find a way.
Can you talk a little bit about, with the prison case, what's interesting about it is it involves, so much of it involves the postal system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the degree to which drugs are trafficked via other means rather than what we think of, which is some dude crossing the border and
Yep. Yep.
How does that break down?
Sure, you can look at it in there's so many different pathways to get there. But I think one of the things that we're looking at too is we understand that as our tactics change as far as holding people accountable, the tactics shift on transportation and how things are done. Utilization of postal service or carrier service is well documented, and we kind of know that that's an issue as well from a national level. But then we know couriers and other people are bringing drugs into our community too. I think there's no one tap to turn off, right? And again, if you turn off one tap, the other one just starts to fill that area. And so I think, again, coming back to root issues and demand driving supply, it will always present itself that way as long as there's a demand.
But the narrative today suggests that if we just close the border, we'll solve the drug problem.
I think law enforcement is pretty clear that you can interrupt supply, and interrupting supply would be a good thing. But if you're not dealing with the root cause, right, if you're not dealing with people who have that demand for that narcotic and some of those issues that are there, it's a multifaceted approach that has to be taken. And I think, it's something that, again, market economics kind of dictate that. If the demand is there, supply will find it. And it's something that we have to continue holistically to look at. I think from a police department standpoint, we always just said, we are one facet of this issue, but society as a whole has a lot to say about how we work through addiction.
Speaking of, go ahead.
I was just going to say, are there any deaths in connection with any, or any arrests in connection with any of these deaths?
We work every case. I can't comment on that right now. Those cases are often very complicated and take a lot of time to build. We have a history of prosecution. We work in particular with our federal partners, but also our state partners. But if we have a case that works and reaches to a certain level, we've worked with both federal and state attorneys' offices to work through those cases.
You mentioned the need for families and friends to support loved ones. What signs should they be watching for, or how can they approach that?
Yeah. It's a really difficult conversation, and I think we can all look back into our own lives about situations and people we've known, friends, family, loved ones who have struggled with addiction. Me personally as well, looking at people who have struggled with alcohol addiction or whatever addiction is out there. Those conversations are really hard to have, and I think it's something that we collectively have to look at, those courageous conversations with people who we know are struggling, but also leaning on some of the nonprofits that are out there to support families. Emily's Hope in particular, other groups that work in this addiction space, to support families to have those conversations. I think they're there to help we want to talk about arrests, we want to talk about different things, but we also want to talk about is what we've prevented. What have we prevented by proactive action and interceding in people's lives?
So the deaths we have this year are below what we had last year?
It's on par.
It's on par.
It's similar-esque, but we know that this can change. You know, like I said, at one point last year we were up over 180% on our overdose deaths. By the time the whole year worked out, we leveled out where I think we saw between 20 and 30% maybe increase in overdose deaths.
Chief, I guess what we would hope is now that we've pushed Narcan out there, that maybe we'd see that number.
Yep. But again, Narcan is a great tool. If you don't bridge the gap with further services, Narcan's buying you another chance, right? And you got to take that opportunity, and family has to help with that opportunity. And it may take a couple chances. Narcan is a great way to give people that chance, right? But that only works for fentanyl. We're still talking about methamphetamine. We're still talking about alcohol. You'll see even some of the K2 synthetics or spice or the things that are out there have caused deaths. And we go back even through the past couple of years, we continue to see that. So the addiction, and again, alcohol, people continue to have alcohol issues that result in their death too. So multifaceted approach. We don't focus on just one thing, is that. But yeah, there's ways that we can intercede and help with people.
I guess I would ask, okay, you're here.
Yeah.
What's the overall message you would like to get to the citizens of Sioux Falls?
Yeah, is that this is an issue and a problem that we continue to have to work on collectively, whether that's government or nonprofit or family and friends. I think you can't have enough conversations with your kids about the danger of drugs and the dangers of addiction so that they know full well what is out there, but also maybe the resources if they get stuck in or pulled into that cycle. I think we continue to have to be aware, but we also have to make sure that we understand that, again, especially with some of these drugs, that you don't get a second chance. And it's hard because you look at your kids and you have these conversations and you continue to push that message, but you also know that people make mistakes and people get pulled into things. So we have to continue to focus on it as a community. I think early intervention and early education for youth is key. Law enforcement, building strong cases and holding people accountable is also the other part of it. But in between, we have to just be working together to make sure that we make an impact. And I'm hoping to report, that by the end of the year, some of our overdose deaths have gone down. But I'm also not naive to think that it's that easy to solve addiction. It's a very, very complicated task.
You brought up K2. K2 was also mentioned in the prison investigation.
Yeah.
And the coroner, maybe last month, 2 months ago, mentioned that he had seen his first case of a K2 overdose death. Is there something new with K2? What's going on with K2?
No, you just look at synthetics and you don't know where these synthetics come from. There's no purity testing to the drug, right? There's no way to really confirm how potent or what's in it. The market for it is there's a profit to be made, there's going to be a market, right? People are going to push this out there. And that's some of the conversation too. You look at the synthetics that are out there are marketed this way, but how potent are they actually, and what's there? And so we, again, have some work there to do to figure out how to address some of those issues. But again, K2 spice, early in my career, we were dealing with that too. Like, it still comes back to the addiction cycle and people who are trying things and doing things and profiting on things that are damaging for our society.
I was going to have you also then talk about Carfentanol and the synthetic drug there as
Yeah.
well, and just the increase of that. Has that included anything of the overdose deaths?
No, we haven't seen Carfentanol play a major role in what we're seeing here. Again, we have a couple, I believe, where we knew, okay, hey, that's Carfentanol, but that didn't produce anything out of the, again, statistical norms that we had kind of seen. There wasn't a spike attributed to that. I would tell you that fentanyl itself is strong enough to do damage. Again, Carfentanol, obviously, but as people struggle through their addiction, there's a tolerance that's gained. There's more product that's being used. There's things that are out there. And so, again, we'll keep an eye on those emerging trends, but again, the trends seem to change, and we'll see where they go.
I want to talk about drugs. Come down the ladder just a step or two.
Yeah.
THC is everywhere.
Yep.
Not only every time it seems like you go drive your car, you smell somebody smoking weed, but THC drinks,
Yep.
THC vaping. What
You know what? There's some legislative issues that need to be addressed in that regard. You know, we've already been talking to lawmakers about the different variations of THC, how the Industrial Hemp Act opened up some unique nuances and paths and trends. There's a little bit of some gray area and loophole in this area that we're working with legislatures to kind of say, how can we clean this up a little bit? I think Texas, you saw, just had a recent ban of some of the THC. I didn't read the full article, but they banned some of the THC derivatives based off what they're seeing in those trends. And again, I think that's something we're continuing to monitor and kind of look at, because it is something that's a little bit unique and interesting, the emerging trends there within the past couple of years.
Are you running into any, I mean, you know, you buy THC drinks in any bar, and
Yeah.
you drink a couple of those, you're plenty high. I mean, are you running into that in terms of like drivers and things like that?
Well, and I would even say this, when we do DUI investigations, we have a consistent number of DUIs. We did see DUIs, I think, are stabilizing a little bit just because of rideshare, and I think public education too, I think has done well too. But when we test for impairment, whether you're impaired on a THC beverage or a THC or a marijuana or whatever, the impairment tests that we do work for those variety. We're trained to kind of detect that and see that. So I would say we've seen a spike in those related driving issues or offenses.
Does it seem odd to you?
Well, we could talk for a while on this one. Yeah. Maybe that's a separate story we could talk about later, because yeah, it is a bit. Sometimes things go and laws get passed, and there's just little loopholes that law enforcement gets stuck with trying to figure out how to navigate, you know, so.
How might the Sioux Falls Police Department be helping the rest of the state tackle this issue?
Yeah, I think when we work with the Drug Task Force, we ask questions. We work with the state's attorneys. We work with our partners at Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office. We're with DCI. And we're always looking at these trends and talking about, well, maybe what's the avenue through legislation? What's the avenue through enforcement? What can we do to impact these issues? But I think we're also pretty palms up about the fact, I think in many years ago, law enforcement would tell you we'll solve all the problems. We can't solve all the problems. We have to work collaboratively with people and across the board to find ways to impact and come up with some solutions, or at least ways to manage or mitigate some of the issues that rise out of it.
Can you clarify, is it 7 or 8 deaths?
So 7, but we have 1 pending toxicology. And we won't definitively say, because toxicology, the coroner's report, we don't make the determination until we get that professional opinion from their office. Again, we had 10 last year at this point. But yeah, and again, just one more message. I think we can talk about a bad batch, or we can talk about a hot batch. There's no such thing as a good batch of drugs. We have to assume at this point, especially with fentanyl, methamphetamine, and even with THC, as potent as it is, that it's all exponentially more potent than you think or have. So I think that's just something we've seen in other parts of the country too, where there'll be a bloom of overdose deaths. If we saw that, we would be reporting that. We would be having that conversation too. So.
Where are most of these overdoses taking place? In cars, in homes?
Homes, sometimes cars, sometimes a variety of places. Like if we laid a heat map out, you'd find them in different spots of the city, but residences, but we encounter them in cars quite a bit too, right? And so people typically, you know, are using at their houses or at a private spot, and that's where they're found. And that's where, again, that's one of the challenges of it too. All right, thanks for coming today, appreciate it.